Welcome to the Real News Network, and welcome to Reality Asserts Itself. I'm Paul Jay in Baltimore. Of all the official narrative that tries to explain the world in the interests of those who control U.S. foreign policy, perhaps nothing is as powerful as the influence of how the media covers Israel-Palestine, a country which is cleared by the United Nations and independent journalists and commissions that have investigated the situation. Israel clearly has an illegal occupation of Palestinian lands. It has committed war crimes in its attacks on Gaza and other places. Yet the prevailing public opinion, and certainly the prevailing media and political opinion, is Israel's the victim in all of this. There's a new film that tries to explain why Americans think this way. The film is called The Occupation of the American Mind, Israel's Public Relations War in the United States. And now joining me is the executive producer of the film and the narrator of the film. First of all, in the studio is Sut Jolly. He's professor of communications at the University of Massachusetts and founder and executive director of the Media Education Foundation. Sut's been involved in the production of more than 75 films, most recently, as I said, executive producer of The Occupation of the American Mind. And joining us from Los Angeles is Roger Waters. He's the narrator of The Occupation of the American Mind. He's an English musician, singer-songwriter, and composer, best known as the bass player, co-lead vocalist, lyricist, principal songwriter of the very famous band Pink Floyd. Over the last few years, he's emerged as a prominent advocate for Palestinian human rights. Thank you very much for joining us, Roger and Sut.
Pleasure to be here.
Roger, let me start with a somewhat personal question to you, and then we'll kind of get into the film more. One of your best-known songs is The Wall. You made a film with the name. The wall, which is the separation wall between Israel and Palestine, or the current occupied territories, has become a major symbol for you in terms of the way you've written about the wall, a passion for you politically. You've talked a bit in previous interviews about breaking down your own personal walls. This wall is a metaphor at many levels for you. When this sort of wall about not just being political in terms of having opinions and thinking, but breaking down that wall where you decide you have to put your neck out, you have to be an activist, you have to actually get out and change the world in a very active way. Why is it the Israel-Palestine question that seems to be the one that galvanizes you?
Well, I've seen that wall. I mean, I saw that wall 10 years ago. I went to Israel. They tacked a gig on at the end of a European tour in Tel Aviv. And that was really the start of my involvement in all this, because I accepted to do that show. And I was then approached by, among many others, by Omar Barghouti. And we had long conversations, and I started to learn a little bit about the situation. And in fact, I cancelled my gig on his and many hundreds of other people's recommendations. I did perform in Israel in 2006, but I moved the show to a agricultural community called Neve Shalom, or Wahat Asalam, I think is the Arab name for it, which is about halfway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And it's an ecumenical community where Jews and Arabs and Muslims, Christians and Druze all live together and grow chickpeas, and their children all go to the same school. And so it's a very cool example. So we did the gig there, and it was a huge success, but I realized that I was playing to an entirely segregated audience. There were only Jewish Israelis there. And also at the end of the show, they were extremely enthusiastic, I have to say, and very knowledgeable about the work that I was doing. But at the end of the show, when I made a very short speech about how they were the generation of Israelis who needed to start communicating with their neighbors and make peace, they went very, very blank. This was not in the script. And they are following a script. And what Sut's movie is about the fact that the citizens of the United States of America are also following a script. And the scripts are remarkably similar because they both derive from the same Orwellian Ministry of Truth, which is the campaign of Hasbara, or the explaining of the Israeli situation to the rest of the world. And so that was one indication that I had in 2006 that things were kind of screwy. I went back in 2007 under the protection of the United Nations, and I traveled around the West Bank extensively with a lovely woman called Allegra Pacheco, who was working for UNRWA at the time.
Is this when you made the film?
Yeah, we made a little clip of spray painting slogans on the wall in actually around the refugee camp in Bethlehem. But in travelling around the West Bank at that time, I had meetings with some of the elders in the refugee camp in Jenin up in the north, and I drove all the way down there, through the east as well, all the way down the Jordan River, and came back through Jericho. And it's chilling when you actually see it with your own eyes, to see apartheid in operation in a country that is almost entirely supported by the United States of America, that makes claims about liberty, freedom and equality and so on. In fact, it's enshrined in the constitution of this country, that all men are created equal and so on and so forth. It's chilling to see a system of military occupation being operated where there is no question of people being treated equally, that one set of people are colonizing the land and the other set of people have no rights at all of any kind. And so confronted with something like that, feelings well up, and I think it's entirely natural for anybody of good faith to say we have to organize and do something about this. Right. And Suits Murphy, The Occupation of the American Mind, is one of the best tools of activism that I've seen, and I was extremely pleased to be able to act as the narrative for it, right, because it very cogently tells the story of how the American public have been deceived since 1947 as to the reality on the ground in Israel.
So how long did it take to make this film? And it's a difficult film to make, because as you're making it, you got to know that it's going to be hard to show this anywhere in the United States.
It took us a while to make. Actually, we started this over 5 years ago. We actually had made a previous film that came out in 2004 called Peace, Propaganda in the Promised Land, which was about comparing American media coverage with European media coverage. And then, then it deals with some similar issues. But then when the Gaza attacks first happened, it seemed as though something new was happening, and so we started to work on a new film. It was the first Gaza attack in 2008, and then we didn't know that while we were working on the film, that another 2 attacks would happen at the same time. So that was why we worked on the film.
Yeah, I mean, that was an astounding moment. The bombs raining down on Gaza, thousands of injuries and deaths, and Israel's the victim.
And Israel's the victim, and there is support in, massive public support in the U.S. For the attacks.
A resolution gets passed in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, I mean, the Senate is almost unanimous around this, and so it's that discongruence between the reality on the ground and American perceptions and opinions of it. And as someone who studies public opinion and someone who looks at public relations and propaganda, I know public opinion doesn't come out of nowhere. Public opinion is formed, public opinion is created. And so that was why I first got interested in looking at this, was how is American public opinion formed around this? Actually, my first interest in this was, I teach at the University of Massachusetts. And about 10 years ago, I started to do surveys in my class. The very first class I would have during the semester, I would ask these students, so liberal students at a liberal university, I would ask them not what they thought, but what they knew. And I asked them a question, said, okay, and so I asked them a factual question, and which was, which of the following countries has been continually condemned in the United Nations for occupying someone else's land? Yes, it's an objective question, the answer to which is Israel. And so I gave them 4 answers that they could choose. One was Israel, one was, couldn't call it Palestine, called them the Palestinians, and then a couple of countries it couldn't possibly be. And what I found was, over a period of 3 years when I did this, between 58% and 63% of my students thought the Palestinians were illegally occupying someone else's land. And so that was where how does this happen? How can you have this kind of reality
We've seen this in other polling across the country, that a majority opinion, at least used to, I'm not sure where it is now, used to have the same idea.
Yeah, so so I was interested, how can reality be turned on its head?
All right, well, let's show a clip from the film, and then we'll discuss more about how this works.
There's really no way to fully understand why the Palestinian people have resisted Israel for so long without understanding this basic history of dispossession and occupation. But for the most part, this isn't the story we get in American media coverage. Instead, the legitimate grievances of Palestinians, including their right to resist an illegal military occupation, get pushed out of the frame by this constant discussion about extremism and terrorism and anti-Semitism.
You know, rational, clear-minded people understand that Hamas is a terror group and it is committed to killing Jews and wiping Israel off the face of the earth. That's not debatable. That's a fact.
It's never about land, somehow. That gets dropped out. It's never about settlements. It's always about they hate us because we're Jewish.
Whatever the Palestinians have done is portrayed in terms of mindless violence against Jews out of some kind of primeval anti-Semitism. No sense of how this started, where the animus comes from. It's completely inexplicable in the way in which it's generally presented. And these people basically kill because they hate, and they hate because they're irrational Muslim fanatics or whatever.
And I think Americans largely get it. They know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are.
This is not an illusion. American public opinion is generally supportive of Israel because it's been led to believe that Israel is in the right and the Arabs are bad guys.
And none of this is by accident. It's the result of a deliberate effort to shape American perceptions of the conflict. A propaganda effort that really begins to take shape with Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982.
So this film is about a public relations exercise, conscious, planned, and this is the film introduces the concept here. This framing of how Israel is the victim and Palestinians somehow hate Jews, and this is why they can't live or abide living next to an Israeli state, a Jewish state. How does this get to be so pervasive that a majority of American opinion, even when they're shown images of children dying in Gaza, in the attacks on Gaza, and in fact, in the last attack on Gaza, I was kind of struck. It seemed to me for the first time almost, the New York Times actually showed pictures of dead children. You actually got some sense of what it had done to people. You could still have Senate resolutions calling this a right of Israeli right to self-defense and such.
Yeah, I mean, actually, Israeli spokesperson, actually said in the war of pictures we lose. So you have to explain, you have to frame the pictures, and that's what Israel has done. It's a massive propaganda campaign to flood the airwaves with explanations for why there are these dead children, and why the blame for the dead children rests in the hands of Hamas and Palestinians and not Israel. And so that's a challenge that Israel recognizes, that these pictures could be very damaging. However, one of the things we know about public relations is pictures never tell a story by themselves. You can always give a different interpretation to the pictures. You can always give a different interpretation to the story. In fact, it's Gore Vidal once talked about the lesson of Confucius, that Confucius was once asked what he would do if he were ever to run the state. That is, if he was in charge, what would he do? And Confucius answered by saying he would, quote, rectify the language. And what he meant by that was if you can control the stories, if you can control the language, then you can control the categories through which people think about the world. And you don't need police and military on street corners. You can colonize people in their own imaginations, in their own heads.
And as you point in the film, one of the most important ingredients of that is repetition, which is kind of why we're doing the real news. It's the daily repetition that makes this thing, shapes people's worldview when they see these events unfold.
Yeah, and that's the way public relations works. It doesn't work by one message by itself. It works by being this cumulative effect over a long period of time. So even if you have one message that comes the other way, it has no impact when the flood of messages is going in the other direction.
Roger, how much were you affected yourself by the sort of official narrative in the media? You had actually booked that concert. Once you got there and you were able to see with your own eyes and talk to people, you changed the venue. But before you went, how much were you influenced by the main narrative yourself?
I'm not sure that it impinged on me greatly. I've been kind of, I hate to say it, but I've been sort of busy doing my work for most of my life. I've worked really hard. I really enjoy my work, so I'm sort of engaged in it. And the story tends to go by somewhere in the background until you're confronted with it face to face in a personal, upfront way, and then you have to respond to it. But further to what you guys were saying about what happens, never mind the theory, which is all very interesting, but you're having a kind of an academic conversation about public relations. The fact is that the system that the Israeli powers that be have, the Hasbara, the explaining of their situation, is not actually explaining anything. It's a euphemism to suggest explaining. They are telling a big lie, and they are repeating it over and over and over again. And they are also persuading some of the lackeys that they have in this country, for instance. Hillary Clinton's a very good example of this, to repeat the lie for them. And they all repeat the same lie over and over again. So in Soot's movie, it's very, very well illustrated. In fact, you used it yourself just now. You talked about bombs raining down on Gaza. Okay, well, that's a perfectly legitimate description for what happened, not just in Protective Edge in 2014, but also in Cast Lead in 2008-9. Bombs rained down on Gaza. The big lie that they tell when there's ever any conflict or ever any bombing of anyone is, and the missiles rained down. And in this movie, you hear people saying it countless times. Hillary said it about 10 times in the Navy Yard in Brooklyn, like 2 weeks ago in the debate with Sanders, when Sanders was trying to make the point that there are two sides to this story. That's all he was. But what he was doing there was completely revolutionary, because he's the first politician that we've heard in the United States even suggesting that there might be two sides to this story. So it's really interesting, the language that they use, that's been, well, Soot knows better than I, that has been taught to them by Frank Lutz and others, who've said, this is how you affect public opinion. You lie to people, and these are the words that you must choose to tell the lie with. But our policy is to tell a big lie, and the big lie is this: we are little David, and we are being attacked by Goliath. And Goliath is these awful terrorists who surround us and who are constantly attacking us. And we, much as we hate it, have to defend ourselves. And that is why sometimes we need to take to the skies with our drones and our F-16s and whatever it is that they... And that is the big lie that they tell. And so the narrative, which actually, the real narrative is that exactly the opposite is true. That Israel is not David, Israel is Goliath. And their attacks upon Gaza, particularly because the people there are incarcerated in an open-air prison and are entirely defenseless against attack from the air and the sea. They defend their attacks on Gaza on the grounds that they are defending themselves. They're not defending themselves. What they're doing is they are what they describe as mowing the grass or mowing the lawn. which is a disgusting euphemism to use about the slaughter of neighbouring peoples who happen to be inhabiting land that you covet. This is the real story of what's going on. The story is that the Israeli government, I'm not talking about Jewish people, I'm not talking even about the Israeli people, though a lot of them, I have to say, do support the actions of their government. But this very, very right-wing government that is in power in Israel at the moment is determined, and it's as plain as a pikestaff to see, to occupy forever all the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, and between the Lebanese border and the Sinai. That is their determination, and they're doing it willy-nilly, and they're pretending not to do it. So part of their big lie is, we want to make peace with our neighbors. No, they don't. That is just a barefaced lie. But if you say that, you then get a spokesperson for the Israeli government will come on and say the lie again, exactly the same lie. They'll say it, we want peace, we're just defending ourselves. The rockets rain down, and they go on saying the same thing over and over and over again. Now, this might be okay in a country like the United States of America for the people to make up their minds about what the true narrative is, except that they're not being given a chance to look at the narrative, which is why you and I are here today, to help Sud persuade the media to show his movie to the people, so the people of the United States may make up their own minds as to what's going on and who is the victim and who is the perpetrator, whether the occupying army, the IDF, or the Israeli occupation force, whether that's Goliath, whether they are the oppressors, or whether it's the people who are being woken up in the middle of the night and having their kids dragged off to prison, whether they are the oppressors. But the film has to be shown so that people get a chance to see the other side of the narrative.
Okay, so we're going to continue this discussion in multiple parts, at which I hope you will come back and watch the part 2. But before we go, how do people watch this film?
We have a website. It's called www.occupationmovie.com. And you can watch the movie there. You can stream it for $5, or we hope people will give more. You can also buy the film as a DVD. And so we hope a lot of people will go directly to the site and be able to watch the film immediately after this interview.
Another way you can get to the film streaming, which is I think $5 to watch the film, or you can buy a DVD, is on the Real News homepage. You'll see a copy of this movie poster. If you click on it, it will take you to the page where you can get to the film.
Why isn't it on HBO? Why isn't it in one of the places where it's readily available for large numbers of cable customers, certainly, to get it without them having to search around the net and without them having to find this particular website or without them having to look for it? This is important information for every citizen of the United States to have at their fingertips. It should be in every home so that people can look at it and then they get a chance to start forming an opinion about the situation vis-a-vis Israel-Palestine.
Well, why it's not on Netflix or mainstream media, we are going to get into exactly that topic as we work our way through the interview. So please join us for part 2 of our interview with Sud Joly and Roger Waters on Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network.